Matthew chapter 2, page 966. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people, Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose ahead of them, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary and bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. When they'd gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi.
Andy has been the cause of much difficulty for me in December, because I've been thinking for ages about what to look at on Christmas Day, which passage or theme to pick up. And I overheard Andy saying to somebody that he was all sorted for Christmas Day. It was all planned and in his mind. And I thought, I'll just pick up on Andy's theme then. That's good. So that will make it clear. And I then asked him, well, what's the plan? And he said, the plan is to be more Sprout-like. So I went home and I shared this with our family, and we chatted a bit about it, sort of tried to guess what Andy might be sort of aiming at and whatever. But that's been my challenge now for a couple of weeks, to think how to make this service appear all connected. And it's been quite tricky. I've been seeing these in my sleep, for weeks on end. We've seen lots of amazing facts about sprouts, but on the basic level, I found myself just focusing on the fact that they really stink. I've just not been able to get that out of my mind. I've now learnt it's because of the sulphur. There was a lovely moment down the front here when Caroline said sulphur, and Simon looked adoringly and said, "Oh, how did you know that, my dear?" And I thought, well, one of them was cyanide, one was mercury. But he's married to a genius, so that's good. So I'm going to focus. I ended up focusing on the smell. I grew up in a house, and particularly my grandparents' house, when I was very little, and we'd wake. Was anybody awake really early today? We would wake at 4, 5 o'clock, and I'd see my grandparents coming down the steps in their nightdress and their nightcap and their candle. And I'd be like, "Where are you going, Gramps? It's only 5 a.m. He said, "I'm going to put the sprouts on." So it was that kind of, they were mushy, my goodness. Anyway, and this is I'll just share my brief journey. So I started with sprouts, I started with the smell. I eventually remembered a verse in the New Testament that speaks about smells, so that helped me along my way. Paul, we've been looking at 1 Corinthians this term. He wrote a second letter, 2 Corinthians, and in that he explains how he and the other first disciples, the apostles, the first missionaries, he's speaking about them. And he says, thanks be to God in 2 Corinthians 2, thanks be to God who uses us to spread the aroma of the knowledge of him everywhere. For we are to God the pleasing aroma. And I had a little dig around. This literally means a sweet fragrance. So if anybody's in for perfume or anything today, we are to God the pleasing aroma or sweet fragrance of Christ among those who are being saved and those who are perishing. To the one, we are an aroma that brings death. To the other, an aroma that brings life. And who is equal to such a task? So he's reflecting on their job of taking the message of Jesus to the nations. One of the older translations says, to the one we are the aroma of death leading to death, to the other the aroma of life leading to life. So smell, that sort of moved me along. If we're sprout lovers here this morning and you're looking forward to a kind of traditional Christmas dinner or whatever, then the smell is a promise, isn't it, of fine delights. Maybe you're going to a neighbour, you're walking through the front door, the smell in the air hits you and your taste buds are already activated. And after this morning, you now know that your stomach is going to be soothed, you're going to be protected from scurvy for the days ahead, your vitamin C is going to go through the roof. So the smell of the sprout for the sprout lover is just a delight, it's a promise. For the sprout hater, walking through that door, or the smell of Christmas dinner, you're already presumably feeling pretty sick. You've already made your mind up, you're not going anywhere near them. My sister, this is back in the day when I don't know if it still happens in your homes, where encourage children to finish everything on their plate. And my sister, she hated sprouts with a passion. She would squash them down and maybe just hide them under like a bit of chicken or something to pretend she'd eaten them. She would carve out the pattern of the tree on the plate to make it look like that's the leaves on, the sprout. Anything to not eat these things. So the smell for the lover is wonderful, for the hater is awful. And Paul speaks in 2 Corinthians 2 about the same sort of thing. He says, as we take the aroma of Christ to people, as we take the message about Jesus to people, to one, it's the smell of life. The message of Jesus, the smell of life, the smell of forgiveness, the smell of reconciliation with God, of relationship with God. It's a joy, it brings rejoicing. But to others, Paul says, it's the aroma of death. It's simply unwelcome. And the message of Jesus brings that reaction. Now I came into land in Matthew 2 and the passage that was read to us, because we see exactly that being played out in this passage. So I was mightily relieved at this point that we've arrived. King Herod is the one example in this chapter. And as if you were here on Sunday, I was still doing these mental challenges of, you can't talk about King Herod and put him front and central on Christmas Day, but here we are. King Herod, he stands out in this passage. If Esther wanted to watch the film Nativity, I don't know if you're any fans of Nativity with Martin Freeman, Dr. Watson, Christmas film set in a primary school, Mr. Poppy, the crazy teaching assistant, and there's a great local rivalry between these two primary schools. I think it's St. Bernadette's, where Martin Freeman is the teacher, a Catholic school, and up the road, and I'm practically quoting from what I heard the other day, Oakmoor, the local posh Protestant school. So you've got this sort of rivalry set up. They're both going to put on a nativity, and the main sort of creative person at the local posh Protestant school decides to go for Herod. And there's a line in there where he says he's often overlooked at Christmas. And then there's this, if you've seen it, it's a bizarre, bloodthirsty nativity. But King Herod, first response in this chapter when he hears the news from these magi that the promised king has been born, is to be disturbed. That's the sort of the word in verse 3. It means agitated, stirred up inside. He is disturbed by the news. His second action is to find out the prophesied location for his birth in verses 4 to 6. The third response is to find out the exact time that the star appeared in verse 7. The fourth response is to send the wise men to find the child and to send him immediately some sort of Google Maps location so that he too can come and worship the child. But the whole thing is a bit of a ruse, really. In verse 16, we see what Herod's really got in mind. It says, when Herod realized that he'd been outwitted by the Magi because they don't return with the news, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. And so Herod uses in this chapter all of the information that he knows about Jesus, everything he's gleaned from the teachers of the law, the experts in biblical prophecy, the many predictions hundreds of years earlier about the arrival of God's king. He gathers all that information, the reports from the wise men, and he orders a mass killing in an attempt to extinguish this promised king. So here's a man for whom the message about Jesus was literally the smell of death in his nostrils. And the funny thing is, the root issue here in Herod's heart is quite simple, isn't it? You haven't got to be a genius as you read this. The root issue for Herod is, I am king. I am king, and there will be no other. That's sort of what's going on. The outcome of that is dreadful. But that's the root issue. There is only room for one king. And I was so thankful for this. I saw this playing out before me yesterday. I was in St Albans. I think I've mentioned before, I think at Starfish you meet many different parents, carers, and so many of them before December begins are sorted for Christmas Day. So there I am yesterday, getting sorted for Christmas Day. And I was walking as I was going home thinking, I'm there, I've finished. Family coming towards me, a couple of parents, a couple of grandparents, a couple of little children, only just old enough to be on bikes, one behind the other. Little girl in front. She's going along very merrily, cycling along very slowly, but just in front of the group. Behind, presumably, little brother. And then I just heard the words from him, I want to be the leader now. I want to be the leader. And he starts to pick up his pace. And this little girl at the front, her face turned steely, her grip tightened, and you could noticeably see her pulling off into the distance. I am king and there is no other. Is that just being played out there? Exactly the same with Herod, but with terrible, terrible consequences. The message of Jesus to Herod was the smell of death, and this other king must be removed. Because the flip side of that, and we, again, if you're here on Sunday, we looked at this, the flip side of this is the wise men. To them, the aroma of Christ is a beautiful thing to them. They know something about the predictions of God's coming king. They see the star. I don't know how or why. They knew it would be there. They pursue it. They come seeking knowledge concerning the promised location of the Messiah's birth, and they follow the star, and they're overjoyed, we're told, when they come and they see the child. And face to face with this king, their response is so completely different to Herod's. Verse 10, we're told that they bowed down and they worshipped him. And those two things sort of connected, aren't they? They go together. They bowed down. That's a real mark of humility, of them humbling themselves in front of this little child. Not quite sure how old Jesus was at this point. But they bow down. They recognize their smallness. They recognize that even though they were probably men of status and importance, all of that paled into insignificance in the presence of this one, this promised king. They bow down, they fall on their faces before him, and they worship him. They acknowledge his magnificence. They acknowledge his great worth. They acknowledge him as the divine king that he is. And to these men, Jesus is the aroma of life. He's a game changer, a life changer. And they fall before him. And as we're thinking about on Sunday, the three gifts that they bring reflect something about the recipient. There's a few gifts I know have been brought this morning. We can have a little look at those maybe at the end. I'm very envious already of Theo's driver. Is it tailor-made, Theo? Is that, yeah, it's just a dream. Have a look at that. Why am I saying that? Oh yeah, the gift. The gift says something about the recipient. We've got an up-and-coming Ryder Cup golfer in our midst. The delight in the gift tells you something about Theo. And in the same way, the gold represents Jesus as king. It's the stuff of royalty. The frankincense reflects the place of mediation, the mediator between God and people, the one who presents a sacrifice to God on behalf of others for our wrongs, our waywardness, our guilt, our shame. The mediator carries all of that and deals with it all. The myrrh tells us it's an embalming spice. It tells us about his death as king and mediator. that would bring about real life, real forgiveness, abundant life, eternal life for all who trust in him, all who bow and worship before him. And the great irony in this chapter is that Herod wants to hold on to life, doesn't he? He wants to hold on to his rule. He wants life. He doesn't want anybody else messing with it. And yet in doing so, he loses all hope of life. For the one that has come to bring life and bring forgiveness and bring cleansing and bring relationship with God. But those that are willing to relinquish their life and bow before him and worship someone else as king, will they gain life? So I want to leave us really with this question today. What about you? What about me? Is Jesus the smell of life to you, the aroma of life? Or is he the aroma of death? Seeing those kids yesterday sort of reminded me, and I'm going to spill you're going to think terribly of me now at this point, but it reminded me of that moment on the motorway, those of you that drive, when for a good couple of miles they've been telling you that this lane is closing. You've been in that situation? Move across for a couple of miles, move across. And people begin to move across. I'm going to look around to see who doesn't now. People begin to move across, don't they? And then maybe then it was going to go from 2 lanes to 1. Same thing, move across, plenty of time. People move across. And eventually the queue will come to a standstill and say, you know where I'm going if you drive a car. And then you've got someone who's bombed down the outside lane, doesn't care, and then indicates, please let me in. Now, I don't know what happens in your heart at this point. But the temptation to think you are not coming in is very, very strong. How dare you? I'm king. I will not let you in. There will be no other king. I don't know if you sense that feeling this morning. I thought I was literally been talking to myself, I'm going mad, talking to myself in the run-up today, that this is a bit confronting for Christmas Day. But I wonder, as you hear the message of Jesus, is there anything of that inside you this morning? How dare he talk about these things? The aroma of death, Paul calls it to the Corinthians. It's a resistance to the message of Jesus. It's not wanting him to be king. It's that root of Herod. I am king, and I will have no other. And the amazing thing this Christmas Day is, of course, we're thinking and remembering a baby born, but he was born for you and me. This is a king who's left the splendor, if you like, of heaven, become a human being, lived, suffered, died, laid down his life, because he's that passionate about every one of us in this room this morning. This is a king. There is no one who has any greater desire for us or love for us. He wants to bring us nothing but goodness and kindness and joy and forgiveness for all that we've done, all that we carry, all our shame, all our guilt. He says, I've come for that, give it to me. That's the king. That's the king that's saying, I want you to come and follow me. So is he this morning for you the smell of life? We can return to our sprouts, the smell of death. It's not really a question you can avoid. If you came to my grandparents' house all those years ago, you can't avoid the smell of sprouts, probably till the end of January. They've been on since 5 a.m. This is a question that we can't avoid. It's a question that we will all answer, and our answer is really, really important. So will you vacate your throne? Will I vacate my throne, or will we cling to it? Will we bow and worship, or will we seek to eliminate him? Do we have the heart of Herod, or do we have the heart of the Magi? And if Jesus is the aroma of life to you this morning, there's so much to rejoice in today amongst everything else, the wonders of this day. So lovely walking down here, just everybody, happy Christmas, such a lovely time to get together, to have fun together, to enjoy, to give and exchange gifts, to eat, to celebrate. But for you, Jesus is the aroma of life. There's so much more that you are rejoicing in this morning. We're thinking about the start of God's plan of salvation. Today, in the town of David, a Saviour has been born to you. He is Christ the Lord. This is the beginning that will end in his death and his resurrection and the coming of his kingdom. To those that are being saved, says Paul, this is the best smell in the world. Have a great day, and I'll hand back to Andy.